Hello, I'm Roger Watson and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Nurse Education and Practice. And for the next 10 minutes I'm going to talk to you about the importance of titles, by which I mean titles for academic manuscripts and ultimately, of course, for published articles. Now, I can't emphasise the importance of titles enough. The title is often the only thing that busy people like myself, Editors-in-Chief, who get many hundreds of papers a month, many thousands a year, will read. So the title is very, very important. It can attract us to the article, or it can completely put us off. And it's what sometimes it's the only thing we read, and it can largely dictate whether we will take a look at the abstract and look further at the body of the paper. I emphasise this is really because we have so many submissions to deal with. We have to find ways of processing them quickly. I have to say that not many articles are probably rejected on the basis of the title, unless the title conveys to us that the article is clearly not within the scope of our journal. But that's another issue entirely. So, well, maybe I should say that first of all, make sure that your article is within the scope of the journal. For example, my journal is educational, so don't send clinical papers. But that's, as I say, that's another issue. So I can't emphasise enough the importance of the title. And the best way to think of a title is as if it's the sign to a shop. So that when you look at a shop and look at the sign, it tells you what the company is, maybe who the proprietor is, but most of all, and most importantly, it tells you what's in the shop, what the shop sells. And that's what you want to know, because you want to know, do you want to go into that shop or do you not want to go into that shop? And if you go into the shop, then you will spend some money. It's the exact analogy of people looking at the title of your article and then going in, deciding if they want to look at it, going in to the article, reading it and possibly citing it. So again, for Editors-in-Chief, the title is very important. It's very important to the whole reviewing process, because if we decide that the article is worthy of having a read and then worthy of possibly being considered, we will put it forward to an editor. And of course the editors can also make a decision based on the title as to whether they want to accept the paper for reviewing or not. And then once they've allocated it to reviewers, it's very important for them. The title will let them know whether or not they want to take that article for review or not. And we have a major problem finding reviewers, so titles can be very important in speeding that process up. So I can't emphasize enough how important the title is. It largely dictates, or often dictates, whether your article gets into the review system, and it does largely dictate, if your article is published, whether or not it is read and ultimately cited. So, one or two things to make sure that your title is right. The most important thing is that the title should be as short as possible. Some journals, very few, but some journals do actually specify a word length, and they're usually quite restrictive. And some journals give a guideline. My feeling is that there's really no excuse for many titles to be beyond 15 words, maybe 15 to 20 at the very most. But that's a lot. You can sometimes get it into fewer words than that. There's nothing worse than if the title's too long, if it goes over many, many lines. A title really shouldn't be more than 2 lines at the very most. That's about 14 to 15 words usually. Anything longer than that, it makes it very difficult to read. It's boring. You've forgotten what the article's about by the time you've got to the end, and it's probably a fair indication that the authors are trying to put too much into that article. So always try to keep them as short as possible. If you're concerned about doing that, get some help. And even when titles are good and clear, it's often the case that as editors we will shorten them slightly. So that's the first thing, brevity. Less is always better with titles. Next, it's very important that you get the methodology into the title, and also to get the methodology first. So for example, if your title, if your study is about a systematic review, then your title should say a systematic review of something. If it's a randomized controlled trial, it should be a randomized controlled trial of X versus Y. If it's a qualitative study or a survey study, those words should be in the title. And if it's cross-sectional or longitudinal, that should be there as well. So try to convey as much as possible about the design of the study in the title and also the topic. That's really all you need. Anything else is far too complex. I can't, of course, emphasize enough that the title should be accurate. If your if your title says a randomized controlled trial, then it should be a randomized controlled trial. Don't say it's a randomized controlled trial if it's a quasi-experimental. That won't work because when the reviewers and the editors look at the article, they realize it isn't, and you are likely then to be rejected. So the title has to be congruent with the contents of the paper. Something I'll talk about when I come to talking about abstracts later, but I'll mention now, is that the key words in the article should be mentioned in the title. If it's a randomized controlled trial, if it's about diabetes, then those things will be key words. They should be in the title. They should also be in the abstract. So try to use the same words throughout. But I'll come back to that when I talk about abstracts later. Other hints, I mean, well, before I proceed, the most important things about the title are they're short and accurate. But I would also strongly advise you not to put your country into the title, or even your city or town, and probably, definitely best not to mention your place of work, your hospital, if the study is carried out in your hospital or in your school of nursing or whatever. So try to keep places out of it. Try to confine your title to methodology and subject. So no point in saying a randomized controlled trial of treatment A versus treatment B for adolescent diabetes in China. That doesn't help at all. The reason for this is that we've noticed that generally speaking, titles which have countries contained in them, articles published with titles containing countries, tend to be lower cited than other articles. The reason for this might be that people may look at that and say, well, that's only relevant to that country and not to mine. So try to make it general, try to rise above the place and to convey the methodology and the subject of the study rather than the place. And I would actually say definitely not to put in the names of hospitals or anything like that. It doesn't help, it's not necessary and it's not required. I would also strongly advise you not to play down your study too much. You've got to be accurate, but for example, if your study is in one hospital or in one town and it's actually quite a small study, it may be perfectly designed and it may be perfectly informative, but don't play it down by saying a small study carried out in one city in one country. Again, that doesn't help. I'm not suggesting that you are tell lies or you're inaccurate in the title, but leave the place and the study setting, leave that for the abstract and the methods. Try not to dissuade people from reading your article when they look at the title. Finally, 2 points which are kind of related. The style of the title. Try to make it, again, as I've said throughout, factual, the methodology and the subject. Don't ask questions in the title. Don't say things like, does treatment X work better than treatment Y? A study. That doesn't help. It's clumsy, it's lengthy, and it doesn't convey clearly and directly what the article's about. And don't make statements like, treatment A works better than treatment B for. Again, that doesn't help and is not recommended either. So, just to recap on titles, one, I can't emphasize how important they are. Think of them as the sign above the shop or like the advert for your article. The most important thing about titles is to keep them short, and I would strongly recommend that you don't ask places, that you don't make statements, and that you don't ask questions in the title. Keep them factual, methodological and subject oriented. That's all I've got to say about titles. I hope you found that helpful, and thank you very much for listening.